Rachel Dolezal appeared on the national stage more than 2 years ago, and since then it has felt inevitable that others would follow her lead. And now it's finally happening because, of course, it's 2017. Adam Wheeler is his name. He was born a white male. As an adult, though, he became transgender and then kept going. He now identifies as a Filipino woman. Wheeler changed his name to Jadu. He travels around Tampa, Florida in a tuk-tuk. It's a kind of motorized rickshaw common in Manila. Kathy Rue is founding publisher of Catalina Magazine, and she joins us tonight to sort this out. So, Kathy, I'm glad you're here.
Thank you.
I'm a little out of it when it comes to what's acceptable and not on the left, and so you're kind of our spirit guide, our shaman.
Thank you.
Our Sherpa for this journey to the heart of insanity. Is this okay or not?
This is totally okay. It's very American to be who you want to be. This person has the freedom to be who she wants to be, and she wants to be a Filipino woman. So that's okay. That's okay.
Yes. So that means that physical reality is no longer kind of a limit to our aspirations. So if you can be, if a white man can become a Filipino woman simply by saying so, then could I become, I don't know, a successful hedge fund manager or an NBA star?
Absolutely. According to Jadu, which is her name, it's what's on the inside that counts, not what's on the outside. So there's a growing movement. There's many people that are now identifying themselves as the other gender and as another culture or race or ethnicity.
But does, I mean, this would entail some kind of like power shifts here a little bit. So like if I were hoping to take advantage of like a college admissions program, could I change for the purposes of that?
I'm not quite sure how it actually would work for college admissions. I mean, I haven't heard of a case, but it sounds like it's accepted. It sounds like it's okay, and Jadu is not hurting anyone. Jadu is fine. If these people want to be who they want to be, that's fine.
Look, I'm not attacking Jadu or mad at Jadu, and a little confused by Jadu, but, you know, I'm open-minded from California.
Right. If this person's not hurting anyone, then what's wrong?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you can, look, I mean, the pie is only so big. So, for example, the federal government has all kinds of set-asides for female-owned businesses.
Right.
And they get contracts. You know, businesses have an advantage in getting massive government contracts if they're owned and operated by a woman.
Right.
So could Jadu just show up? Or could I say, you know, my name is now, I'm a Filipino woman.
Right.
And I now qualify for this program. There are only so many contracts, so maybe I beat you out for one of them. How would you feel about that?
Well, that's fine. If you identify as a woman and you're not hurting anyone, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be a woman, that's fine. That's perfectly fine.
Even if I got the contract over you, who was born a woman, I don't change my appearance.
You must be more qualified then. You were more qualified if you got the contract over me.
But it's not a matter of qualified. We have programs that set aside on the basis of sex.
And qualifications in that sex. And this person now wants to be part of that sex. So if you want to be part of our sex, then you're more qualified. No, it's a matter of qualification, and welcome to our gender.
Is there any limit then to like the make-believe becoming real that you're describing? I mean, is there anything I can't be? If I can be a different sex, a different race, could I be a different species?
Well, if it's not hurting anyone, then what's the problem? I mean, it's very American to be who you want to be. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's beautiful. I think it's great.
We used to call it, and I'm not attacking anybody at all, but we used to say, and Freud himself, the father of modern psychotherapy, said that would be delusional to imagine that you are something that you're not. I mean, people were institutionalized for calling themselves Napoleon, famously.
But as you said, it's 2017, so it's okay now to be transracial and transgender. We're accepting. We're an open society.
Right.
We're a modern society.
Would not. So if you had a friend who said, by the way, you should know that I'm Napoleon. Don't send me to Elba.
Right.
But I'm Napoleon. I'm going to invade Russia or whatever.
And that's okay. Yeah.
That would not be a sign of mental illness. That would just be a sign of like personal actualization.
Absolutely, yeah. As Jadu said, it's what's inside that counts. And if I want to be friends with a person who wants to think that, that's my choice, and that's that person's choice.
Is it your choice? So that's the question. This is my final question to you. Are the rest of us allowed to remain reality-based, or are we going to be punished for not playing along with other people's fantasies? What if I say, Jadu, I'm going to call you Bob. Like I grew up next to you. You're Bob then. You look like Bob now. Should I be punished for calling Jadu Bob?
Well, no, I think that's the beauty of it, that Jaddu can be who Jaddu wants to be, and you can be who you want to be. So that's the beauty of our country. You can be who you want to be.
Wow. Yeah. This is an elaborate defense of Elizabeth Warren, clearly. You've just mounted. It's like totally demented. But I appreciate
Thank you
giving us the new rules. Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you.
Remember that Drexel professor who wanted white genocide for Christmas? I hate even saying that. Well, he's back, and he's now blaming whiteness for the Texas church shooting. Take a listen.
Whiteness is a structure of privilege, and it's a structure of power, and it's a structure that when it feels threatened, lashes out.
Wow. So is this another sign of chaos on college campuses, and is there anything that we can do about it?
Joining us right now is a psychology professor from the University of Toronto and the author of the upcoming book, 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Doctor, good morning to you. Thanks for making a couch call today.
You bet.
What do you make of this Drexel professor who's been in and out of the news so often, and now he's blaming that for the cause of the shooting in Texas?
I think he's applying his ideological formula to a very complex problem. And it's an easy thing to do. It's this sort of postmodern formula that's taught to university students everywhere now.
What is the formula?
Attribute everything to racial disparity and oppression, victimization.
Just everything?
Well, essentially, it's a recasting of Marxism, I would say. And with the Marxist theory, it was rich against poor, bourgeoisie against proletariat. And that was recast in the 1970s as oppression due to group identity, essentially. And so that's where identity politics came from. It's a formula you can learn in about a day, and then you can use it to explain everything.
College is designed to teach you to think about the world and prepare you for the world outside of college. How is this helping that, and what kind of students are we getting when they're 22, 23, whenever they graduate?
You have the tense wrong. College was that.
Understood.
So, and I don't think it is that in many cases now, especially in the liberal arts, and that's a real catastrophe.
Much different than my experience 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah, well, things have changed dramatically in the last 5 years, I would say. And we saw this rise of political correctness in the 1990s. It burst forward in between 1990 and about 1993. And then it seemed to subside a little bit, but it's back with an absolute vengeance now. And we know that most of the university campuses, in the liberal arts anyways, are heavily dominated by leftist thinking, and radical leftist thinking for that matter.
Well, what happened, Doctor, in the early 90s to spawn this?
Well, I think it's popped up more or less repeatedly since the late 1960s. I'm not sure exactly why.
Started with the anti-war movement?
Yeah, with the anti-war movement, but there was a fair bit of radical thinking in the 1960s on the left side, and many of those people ended up teaching in universities. And so, and with the rise of postmodernism, that's a huge factor. That was a French intellectual school that was a transformation of Marxism into identity politics, essentially. And because I think, in some sense, because it requires almost no intellectual effort and leaves you with an overwhelming sense of moral superiority, it's very attractive to people. They're basically teaching young people, I would say, to be ideological avatars, to go act out this pernicious doctrine in the real world.
Well, some of them were doing that. They were howling at the moon. They were screaming in the night. They were upset at the year anniversary a few days ago of President Trump being elected. What do you make of that?
Well, I think a lot of that is a kind of narcissism. I mean, that sort of public display. It's probably amplified to a great degree by social media and media in general, right? Because this sort of highly emotional display does make a reasonable news clip. But
what's the danger here?
Well, the danger is everywhere at the moment. The danger is increased polarization. We're seeing that nonstop at the moment, and I think it's mostly because the people on the radical left are pushing way too hard. That's my estimate. You see that in Canada as well as the United States and all around the Western world.
I want to ask you this because I live in a very Democratic state, Connecticut, right?
Yep.
None of my friends would ever operate like this. Now, granted, my friends are older. They find this reprehensible. So I mean, it seems like a lot of Democrats are fired up about this idiocy.
Oh, yeah. Well, lots of people who were in what you might describe as the liberal center are very unhappy that the political landscape on the left side has shifted way over to the radical leftist side. That's a very common sentiment now. And I think it's happening faster than people really understand. So it's almost impossible to overstate how influential these postmodern doctrines have become and how they're seeping in now into corporations, mostly through HR departments.
I read an article, and it was about Barbara Corcoran, and she was talking about people she hires and doesn't hire. And when she's investing in companies like we see on Shark Tank, she says if you're a victim, she hates the word victim and people who have that victimized mentality, where they are the victim, woe is me. Do you see that more and more? Is that like a millennial thing, or is it...
Well, it's a form of justification for the use of power. You know, if you're a victim and you can ascribe moral superiority to yourself, then you're justified in the use of force. And I did a paper with a student of mine who toured the mass graves in Eastern Europe and Yugoslavia with the UN, and we looked at the precursors to genocide, and one of them was an enhanced sense of victimization. That allows you to lash out at the hypothetical perpetrators before they do anything, because you're being victimized. You saw the same thing to some degree in Nazi Germany.
Yeah, Hitler. Hitler felt very victimized.
Yeah, Hitler claimed that the Jews were victimizing Germany, essentially. And so once you're a victim and you have all the moral status that goes along with being a victim, then you can't do any wrong, essentially. So.
Interesting discussion. Dr. Jordan Peterson's new book is called 12 Rules for Life, an Antidote to Chaos, which we certainly need now. Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Hey, thanks very much for the invitation.